Railfanning in August started out with a bang on August 1st, actually, when we went to the depot and saw this locomotive. If you're wondering why I'm not saying the class, that's because I have absolutely no idea. Nobody knows what this thing is. Even weirder, it says Grex, SPS, and Loram. What is it owned by? What is it doing? What is the class? I have no idea. On August 2nd, we went to Potawatomi Zoo, and I unfortunately missed this CN train powered by definitely not rare at all, no sarcasm at all, SD60s. On August 4th, my dad caught a pair of South Shore Freight SD38-2s in an oil train while he was stopped at a railroad crossing. That same day, while driving home, we accidentally paced this train with two CSX GEs at the head. Unfortunately, they were too far away and obscured by corn, so I don't know exactly what their classes are. Then, we got stopped at another railroad crossing by a different train. This one was CN, and guess what it was pulled by? If you guessed the SD60s, you'd be correct. If you said I'm disappointed about missing them, that would be an understatement. On August 7th, we're back at the depot, and it's a beautiful day outside. And that Grex, SPS, Lorman 6012 is still here, and now it's pulling Grex 107, a flatbed, and it's got an excavator on it. This exact flatbed showed up last year while I was at the depot. At that time, it was being pulled by Grex 602, which was another switcher owned by Grex, assuming this one's owned by Grex. And we caught a intermodal train. This train was actually pretty cool because it had a BNSF GEVO in the head and then a Union Pacific SD70 H-T4 behind that. That same day, coincidentally for the second time already this month, my dad was at Union Mills and caught a CN train. It was a mixed freight with a CN GEVO leading and a amazing, not rare but still cool, City Rail in second. It also had this weird neon / washed out sea green boxcar. August 10th, and we're back at the depot. There's now this set of gondolas alongside the Lorman. The first train we caught was a Norfolk Southern Intermodal with a GEVO leading and an AC-44 trailing. And it was booking it! There was also this weird half-length Parsha Hawaii intermodal container. The second and final train was a monstrous mixed freight with an NS GEVO at the front, two BNSF GEVOs behind that, an NS-9, and then another BNSF GEVO. There was this Canadian Pacific gondola that someone graffitied Norwalls onto. This GNTX TTX Railgun gondola. Another TTX Railgun gondola, but this one's graffitied, and the reporting marks are yellow instead of white. And here's another one, again with the yellow reporting marks. Then a incredibly beat-up Canadian Pacific Railway gondola. Shoo! And whatever this is, I have absolutely no idea what it is. After my trip to Downers Grove on August 11th, it didn't take that long for me to get back to Railfanning. On August 16th, the last day of summer, we were uptown and I convinced my grandma to stop here for a little bit so I could get some pictures of the Grex, Lorman, SPS 65. I still haven't figured out what it is. After school on August 18th, which was the second day of school, we headed to the depot just for a little bit. The Grex was still there, and we took a couple pictures of these N&W hoppers, and there was a lot of hoppers. Like, this is a lot of hoppers. This is a lot more than I've ever seen at the depot before, and they were clearly being used for maintenance work. But we were here to see a moving train, and a moving train we did eventually see. It was a BNSF intermodal, but it wasn't by no means a normal BNSF intermodal. I mean, it was a normal BNSF intermodal. It had an H3 GEVO leading, which was pretty bored, and in second there was an H1-9, which excited me a little bit, but those aren't that rare. That was the only full train we saw, but while we were driving home over the overpass, we did see this intermodal. Not sure what railroad company it was from because we didn't see the motive power. And on August 21st, we missed a pair of CSX YN2s. On August 26th, we went to the Union Mills Festival at Mill Pond, and we then went to Wellsboro afterwards. But while we were going to Wellsboro, we caught this Canadian National train, which was stopped on this bridge because a CSX train had crossed over the crossing at Wellsboro. We were leaving just as it was leaving, and once we arrived at Wellsboro, we got a small glimpse of the two Canadian National GEVOs leading the train. The rolling stock on this train was pretty interesting, like an IC Death Star grain hopper, a Canadian National boxcar with still Grand Trunk Western reporting marks, these two old gondolas, a CP Rail Pac-Man auto rack, a Conrail auto rack. You can hear me singing the Conrail song in the background. Uh-oh. That's not good. So, we waited for over an hour for a train, which isn't that rare in rail fanning, but for us, where we really only rail fan in busy spots, it was a long time. Luckily, eventually, a train showed up, which you can see at the very bottom of this photo. The train was a CSX intermodal with a GEVO leading and two CM44s behind it. So, yeah, nothing rare. While the train was approaching, we heard a horn from another train. Turns out there was another train, but it had to wait for the CSX intermodal to cross the diamond before it could. Just to make sure, we looked down the tracks, and for sure there was another train. But it had an all-red front. I tried to think of trains that had an all-red front. CP didn't, they had their logo. CN didn't, they also had their logo. I thought it might be a patched leaser unit or something. But then the actual engine came into view, and all of our suspicions were thrown out the window because it was Canadian National 8952, the Grand Trunk Western Heritage Unit. Not only was this the GTW Heritage Unit, but also it was leading. It was in an all-EMD lash-up with an SD75I behind it, and this is ex-GTW territory. Wait, that's not supposed to be here. And in the middle of the train, there was even more epicness, because there was two more Canadian National SD70M-2s. As for rolling stock, there was this PNNW auto rack and this huge string of really old flat cars. And you could tell, not only because of their old design, but also because of how rusty they were. And yeah, that was pretty much it for interesting rolling stock. While we were leaving, though, we had to pass over this railroad crossing, which we weren't going to anyway, it was closed, and we caught a Union Pacific intermodal by accident, with an SD70M leading and a GEVO trailing. Since we had to travel in the same direction as the intermodal to get to the other railroad crossing, we ended up accidentally chasing it. Or pacing it, I guess this would be. You can see the long area of bushes with very small gaps in them behind Wellsboro, and also my terrible camera work because we were, driving down the road. Here you can see the intermodal cars passing back through Wellsboro, where we get our best view of them, as well as a view of the backhoe that was at Wellsboro on this specific day, which I couldn't take a good picture of because it was in private property. You can also see the CN dwarf signals, the small CSX air canister thing. I'm not sure what that was supposed to be, before we eventually head back out into trees and the intermodal cars are obscured. And then we arrived at the railroad crossing and had to wait for the end of the intermodal to pass by. On August 27th, my dad and my brother were walking downtown and they decided to walk over the overpass, where they decided to take a couple small pictures and videos of the Grex 6012. Still don't know what it is. As you can see, there are two MOW trucks right next to it. However, they heard the sound of a train, and thanks to my brother, they stayed in order to see it. As you can see, there's a whole lot of gondolas. The train was that local freight that pulls the steel coils, with a GEVO leading and an SD70M-2 trailing, which was 2662. Remember that, it'll be relevant later. On September 1st, seeing as fall was fast approaching and the days were getting shorter, I decided to go out rail fanning at the depot at night again so that I could catch that Amtrak again. But before we could even get to the depot, a train showed up, which was a Norfolk Southern mixed freight with an AC-44 leading. Now, the motive power wasn't very interesting, but the cars? Oh, the cars! Yep, that is a boxcar painted in Phase 4. To understand why this car exists, we have to go back to the 90s. During that time, Amtrak was trying their hardest to get into the freight and mail service so that they could make more money and break even. So they introduced these boxcars on a lot of their trains. Unfortunately, due to a mix of the boxcars not being very reliable and Class 1s lobbying against Amtrak and getting into freight service, they eventually got rid of their boxcars and sold them off to car leasing companies. And I caught one. But that wasn't it, because there was also a small N&W grain hopper, an unpatched Chicago Northwestern grain hopper, and this string of 86-foot boxcars. I knew 86-foot boxcars existed for a while, and I'd always wanted to see them because a lot of them were painted in fallen flag schemes. Speaking of that, behind them there was a KCS boxcar, an extremely small gondola, a Southern Railway 86-foot boxcar, and, speaking of 86-foot boxcars, a Norfolk Southern one was at the very end of the train. Once we arrived at the actual depot, we didn't have to wait very long for a train, because a BNSF mixed freight showed up, although it had a Norfolk Southern GEVO at the head as foreign power. Then I saw this green BNSF coil car, the CP Rail and Sioux line, which looks like the Sioux line was graffitied on, grain hopper, these two Cyro Trans reefer cars, this Santa Fe boxcar, what the heck, and a BNSF GEVO at the rear. The next train was absolutely not something I expected to see at all. It was a Canadian National grain train. CN doesn't have trackage rights over this, so this has to be a transfer train. It was led by a GEVO and trailed by a Dash 9. But for some reason, there was a guy with an afro in the second locomotive, the Dash 9, who waved at me. What? After that was another unexpected train, a Norfolk Southern coal train, full of coal coming west from the Allegheny Mountains. I have no idea why I've never seen an NS coal train at the depot before. Maybe they're just rare or something, who knows. The last up was two GEVOs, which is pretty boring, although it did have two Conrail coal hoppers, which I thought was pretty neat. Then the bottom right signal turned orange, which I've never seen before. It was only ever the top right signal. Of course, the bottom right changed back to red, and the top right became orange before the next train showed up, which was a Norfolk Southern intermodal with an ACE leading and a AC 44 in second. Finally, the Amtrak I had waited over 2 hours to see showed up, and it was late. Of course it was. It's Amtrak. What did you expect? It was led by two ALC 42s, which was quite interesting because these are normally used on only long-distance routes. I guess Amtrak considers this a long-distance route. Anyways, I really liked the ALC 42s, so this was really nice. After that, we would have left, but the signal was still green, so we decided to stay for the next train, which was a Monday Norfolk Southern intermodal with 2 GEVOs. On September 15th, my dad and my brother were going for another walk, and while they were passing through Wellsboro, they caught a couple pictures of this Norfolk Southern -9. On September 20th, I headed back to the depot, and Liam was there. He's another train-loving kid who goes to my school, and I've been looking to meet him for a while, so this was pretty exciting. He showed me a lot of his cool train videos that he had taken, like a high hood, an executive Mac. I still haven't seen another executive Mac. I want to see another executive Mac. Anyways, the first train we caught was a Norfolk Southern intermodal with an AC 44 leading and a -9 trailing. It snuck up on me. The second train was a Union Pacific grain train with an ACE leading and an AC 6000 CW in second. Since UP's engines were built only with 44,000 horsepower, they weren't as unreliable as other railroads' AC 6000s, and as a result, UP is still hanging on to a few, although they're very few and far between. As the end of the grain train started to roll out into the distance, then, oh my god, Norfolk Southern SD70M-2s. And guess who was in second? 2662 again. Yeah. Apparently there's a South Shoreline down there that I didn't know about. And it had 2010. On September 25th, we were going uptown with Grandma and Grandpa to get food for lunch. And of course, because, you know, why not, I convinced them to stop at the depot, much to my brother's annoyance. Obviously, since I hadn't planned for this trip, I didn't have my regular gear to shoot with, so I had to use Grandma and Grandpa's phones. Unfortunately, Grandpa's phone is an Android, and so it wouldn't let me send the footage over. Anyways, the train was quite interesting. It had GP60s as the motive power, and only 2 grain cars. We were going to wait for another train, but it didn't show up. Yeah. But there were these workers working on the Lorman. I'm not sure what they're doing, but they left eventually. On September 26th, my mom was coming home from a doctor's appointment and happened to get stopped by a train at the depot. It's a mixed freight with a BNSF H2 GEVO leading, hope there's another one to add to the counter, and a Canadian National GEVO trailing. Notice that the Lorman isn't there, and neither are any of the gondolas. Near the front of the train, it had this pretty neat string of gondolas with several road names including IHB and Norfolk and Western. On September 30th, we went to my cousin's birthday and on the way back made a quick stop at the depot. As you can see, there's a train. There was actually a second train because we got a meet and we didn't catch the power on either one. However, I did see the power on the mixed freight. It was a BNSF H2-9 and an H3 GEVO. Would have liked to have caught that train, but it's not the end of the world. As you can see, the Lorman was back. Those people must have been working on it so they could get it to move, leave the yard, and then it must have come back with another string of cars. We did eventually catch the one train I needed, which was a double Norfolk Southern ES40 DC GEVO intermodal. That was where Railfanning for the month ended. Well, I hope you enjoyed this documentary, and make sure to come back next time for another documentary just like this one.